In the Alchemi-Culture philosophy, there are 7 polar aspects of humanity that we need to look at if we hope to transform ourselves and the world around us. These are cosmology and philosophy, law and justice, economics and currency, citizenship and social dynamics, agriculture and ecology, science and technology, and healing and medicine. In this podcast, we're going to talk about these topics. We're going to expose ideas that can help inspire an alchemical transformation of our culture, one listener at a time. Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. Today, I am super excited to welcome back Crichton Miller. We had him on the show a while ago. Unfortunately, he was in holiday in Spain, and the bandwidth or something of the internet was just so terrible. It was very, very difficult to hear him. So he and I had a great conversation. The recording, however, did not turn out so very well, such to the degree that we couldn't even put subtitles on it when we tried to listen back to it. And AI was even confused as to what the hell was being said. So we are super excited to have you back on, Crichton. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Very well. Thank you for inviting me on. And yes, I think the picture's a little clearer this time.
Yeah, the picture is clear, the audio is clear. This is absolutely fantastic. So for those of you who missed the original episode, the name of Crichton's book that I picked up is called The Golden Thread of Time. And this is probably one of my favorite reads, actually, of 2023 and early 2024. I feel like this book was just absolutely instrumental in putting together a bunch of different information that I needed to have in order to understand how things like the pyramids would have been able to be built, and in order to understand theories of ancient seafaring navigation and a number of other things that it seems like to me are actually clear that happened, and that history, the way that it's been documented, is wrong. But there are certain pieces of the puzzle that really need to fit into that equation in order for us to be able to understand how that could have realistically been possible. And I feel like this book and the resources that you have on academia.edu have really illuminated some of those. So let's go ahead and talk about this, Crichton, because the entire basis of your book is really centered around the concept of a Celtic cross as, first of all, a measuring instrument that is able to measure distances over land and be able to calculate angles and trajectories and be able to do basically what we would now be doing with like laser leveling and surveying tools.
Yep.
But it's also able to calculate trajectories and distances in the sky. So being able to take a look at stars, planets, other astronomical objects, comets, etc., and being able to measure their distance. And you assert also and show very clearly inside of your book how this can be used for ancient navigation. It's kind of a one tool to rule them all type of thing. So let me turn it over to you, and I would love for you to just start off telling us a little bit more about how did you even have the revelation that the Celtic cross was anything other than an ornate piece of kind of Celtic ornamentation that we see oftentimes in churches and graveyards.
Well, I think that's a good start. The first time I really looked at the Celtic cross, it was in 1957. I would have been 8 years old. And there was a cross opposite. I was brought up in the west of Scotland on a place called the Gairloch, on the River Clyde. And it's all Viking country.
Mm-hmm.
And opposite my village school, I think there were only 20 children in the school, was a church called St. Modens. And on the top of St. Modens Church, who I found out later was an Irish navigator who had landed in Scotland spreading Christianity. And on top of that church is a stone, it's still there today, a stone Celtic cross. Incidentally, my school isn't. It's now a co-op supermarket.
Oh, wow.
I know. And so I looked at it and I wondered. Now, you have to remember back in those days in Scotland, we were taught by rote mathematics or multiplication tables, and we were taught our ABCs. And what's really interesting about that, I guess, is how it came into play in my research 40 years later. Now, during that period of time, I've been in the Royal Air Force, air traffic control, also in long distance supply chains, what they call logistics and transport. But I was also a fully qualified yacht master for the Royal Yachting Association. And I'd sailed large yachts on the west of Scotland in the Mediterranean, on the outskirts of the Atlantic Ocean. Never crossed the Atlantic Ocean, but I went down the coasts. That's a wild part of the world. So, yeah, fantastic. There you go.
Yeah, and right up here, I'll see if I can zoom in further.
That well done. That's St. Moden's Church in Roseneath.
Yeah, it brings you right back to your boyhood.
Yeah, it is. And one of the interesting things, I guess, is for those of you who are a little esoteric and you've looked at Roslin Chapel and so forth, that's the main pilgrim route to Iona. And they had to cross the Gairloch and then enter up here before they crossed over the hills into the distance on their way to Iona across the many lochs. Roseneath means beneath the rose line.
Yes.
Okay, so that I was very lucky to be brought up in that area in the wilds of Scotland. Of course, nature and sailing and fishing and all of that sort of thing. But going back to it, wasn't for 40 years that I thought to myself, having understood the Bronze Age trade routes for tin and copper to Cornwall, to Spain, and also the interesting thing was soapstone, because that was used to make molds for making the bronze in. So most of the copper came from Cyprus in the Levant in the Eastern Mediterranean. They originally got their tin from Iran and shipped it across land and built these kingdoms within the Levant, including Egypt, which was the only one survived after the collapse. And this lasted for 2,200 years. And they explored and went further to Spain, up the coast to France, into Britain, and into Northern Ireland, where there are sources of tin. So, of course, I'm curious by this stage. I'm thinking, well, I'm a navigator. I can find latitude and longitude, but how did they do it? Because just the simple act of crossing from Britain to Ireland to get gold, you're out of the sight of land.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'd read the great explorers like Thor Heyerdahl and also Tim Severin, who sailed a leather-bound curragh boat to America.
Yeah.
Both of them were put down, and they were put down by academia for saying that it was impossible because they couldn't find longitude and latitude. So I was determined. So it started out, I took a piece of wood and I pointed it at the current pole star. Now, for anybody who doesn't know this, there's a thing called precession of the equinoxes. So the last pole star, accurate pole star, was 2,800 BC, which is nearly 5,000 years ago. And there was no pole star in between. So, of course, that was interesting. But the point was, I took this piece of wood and I pointed it at the pole star. And, of course, my hand was shaking. I'm thinking, this is no good. How can so I put a staff on it. And then that was steady. And then I thought, well, how shall I get it to work? I'll hang a plumb line from the middle. But then I need a scale. So I took a helix protractor and drew a scale on a piece of cardboard, cut it into a circle, stuck it in the front. And then I thought, I'm holding a Celtic cross.
Yeah.
So it took me 2 years of research after that to see if there was any. And do you know, there's nothing, absolutely nothing on it in history, in the universities. I thought this is absolutely crazy. So I wrote to the Nature magazine about it. Now, the problem is I'm in commerce, in logistics and transport. At that time, I was handling up to 20,000 drivers supplying in what you would call in America semi-trailers,
Right.
supplying across Europe and Britain, and for the big, including Asda, which is Walmart and all of that sort of thing. And I couldn't get it published because academia is a closed shop.
Yes.
So they said you have to have a peer group review. Well, never being put down because I'm a stubborn West of Scotland ex-Viking Scot. I thought, well, I'll do the toughest kind of peer review you can do. I'll go to the British Patents Office and apply for a patent to prove it works.
Yeah. How about them apples?
Yeah, how about them apples? Now, of course, that is far more powerful than any academic peer group review. Not that I'm knocking academia because they do fantastic work, but the point about it is it's serious sue you stuff if you get it wrong. So they did a worldwide search and they didn't do me any favors, I have to tell you, because what they did is they said, which you needed a patent, it's not obvious. Now, if they'd said, okay, this was used as an instrument in historical, so then I would have gone, great, job done. That's it, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But of course, it's become a burden. Because of course, then what we're doing is battling academia. Having said that, in my academic page, I've had now approaching 20,000 downloads of my papers, and 110 universities, including alumni, have read it, and about 45 countries. So I'm kind of reaching out there to people, but it's a little complex because people have, I guess, generally the general public have followed a path of seeing things as they're said. How do I put
Too
that?
true. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the most shocking thing I did was in a TV program years ago, and the commentator said, "That'll blow people's minds away." So I'll do it for you. Okay. And what I'm going to show you is the thing that blows people's minds because they see it on churches, okay, but they don't expect the wheel to spin.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's always when you see it in graveyards, when you see it on churches, when you see
Yeah,
it in paintings, it's always stationary. And there's
it
no
is. And
there's no
yeah,
angle ticks. They kind of look like maybe rays of light that are coming from behind the cross. A lot of people have speculated that it's the sun rising behind the cross and
yeah.
that it goes back to Pictish history and other things like this, but nobody's seeing it as a measuring instrument.
Well, the point about it really is wheels are meant to spin.
Yeah, there you go. There you have it.
So that's the first thing. But on this one, which is all of the esoteric things you would see on a cross and on a church, showing infinity and showing marks. You see many of them that are actually marked around the edges.
Yes.
But of course, what I'd done very simply is design something that you could measure angles with. But it's a two-man job, as you can see. You can read through the hole and then, okay, you measure the angles that way. But you can also measure angles sideways.
Yeah,
And
there you go.
you can measure angles laterally. Okay, so that's a beautiful thing. But the simplicity of it, if you were to make it in a modern terms, is this.
Which
Okay,
you actually have schematics for in one of your academia.edu
I do.
downloads.
I do. And it goes through all the things that it does. But for those that are into mathematics, and I won't bore anybody, but this is before trigonometry. This is where trigonometry comes from. It's spherical geometry. It's the ability to measure the sky. But what's more important, and being a little ruined by the French introduction of the meter, is that it's Sumerian mathematics, 5,000 years old, came from Sumeria, which is in the area of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf of Oman, I think. And that's where it was invented. And 360 degrees is used for geometry, but it's also used for timekeeping. And it cannot be replaced by the French metric system. Okay, but the other thing that they also did is measure distance, and that comes from the human hand and the human foot. So the idea of metric is tens. Now, I know that Britain and United States of America and Myanmar and Liberia are the only ones that keep the old system, which I was taught at school and they drummed into me. And it's about 12, okay? And this is because people think there's like 10 fingers, that's metric. But actually 12 is counting the segments in the hand. And there's 12 and 12, 24, which makes 24 hours in a day. When the Sumerian system comes in, it then becomes 60 minutes, and then it becomes 60 seconds. And people say, well, they couldn't measure seconds. But yes, they could. On one of the instruments I made, it's roughly 40 inches for the plumb line, and it ticks away at the same speed as a resting heartbeat, 60 beats to the minute.
Wow.
Okay, now that's really important because that's what you're looking at here, from my point of view, is amazing because the cosmos is associated with the Earth. And they always knew that, the ancient people. But what a lot of people don't perhaps know is if you hold your hand out at arm's length with your two eyes, the little finger covers 2 moons. Now, a moon is half a degree wide at arm's length, okay? And it's also the same, because of eclipses, they know that the sun's the same.
Yeah.
So there's 720 of them going around the Earth if you were to put them side by side. So 720 moons around the Earth.
That's
360 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that fantastic? And it's so simple, but it's perfect.
Well, let's unpack that just a little bit, because if I'm not mistaken, the Egyptians used a very similar system to that. And of course, everything was based on a common unit where the microcosm, or the individual, is a reflection of the macrocosm, or the larger Earth outside. And so when you can utilize these types of basic measurements that are directly in proportion, regardless of the size of the human body measuring,
yes,
that is a very fascinating system.
It's in perfect proportion. So the next thing is that the foot. Now, there'll be some mathematicians listening, but the hardest thing to teach children is pi. Okay, so it's 3.14195, I think, is the ratio. The simple way I teach my grandchildren pi is this is the original symbol for pi. Euler changed it to the Greek symbol for perimeter. But what it is the distance from there to there, okay, roll it one circumference, and it's pi. All right, so
that makes so much more sense. That's a really easy way of.
It's so easy to remember, isn't it? But if you look at the Egyptian Coptic cross, it's pi.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay?
It is.
Yeah, so you've got a line along the bottom, circle on the top, and this design sitting on there, and a staff. Okay, so there you go. There's pi. But it's also the ancient Phoenician Hebrew symbol teth.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, and that's number 9 in it. Yeah, have a look. It's great.
Let me pull that up so that people who aren't familiar with
this. Yeah.
This, let me share my screen for those who are not familiar with Hebrew. There we go.
Yeah, you've got to go to Phoenician or Paleo-Hebrew.
Okay.
And there you go. It's so you see, Ted. Now this is really interesting. If you blow up the one which has got the bull's head as well, okay. So there's Teth, okay. But you'll like the one in the top right because this also came from astronomy, astrology, and it's a chap called Brian Peller who unraveled this. If you look up at Aleph on the right-hand side, you'll see
Yes.
it's in, so you can see Aleph, yeah, and that's an A. Flip it through 90 degrees, and it becomes A in thick, and Beth becomes the other one. Beth means house, and Aleph doesn't mean ox. The word Aleph, Beth, means alphabet, means house of God.
Yeah.
Now, the house of God there can be assumed to be the age of Taurus because it's a bull's head.
Correct.
Yeah? Okay, and so then you've got 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, of which Teth is number 9, as well as being the letter T. Okay, now the Egyptians also have that. Now, I don't know if you'll find it online these days. It seems to have disappeared. There's a thing called NWT because they didn't have vowels, but Nuit, which they say means walled city, walled village. But it's exactly the same as Teth. Now, from my speculation, is it's actually talking about the planet Earth with the surrounding of the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac, which comes from Babylonia.
Is this, let's just take a look at this here really fast if we can.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is some sort of dumb web page that there's all sorts of clickbaity. I'll try and find this and then see if I can share it again. But
Okay.
yeah, let me see. Because yeah, Nuit, even the word Nuit, typically in Egyptological studies, has typically a female figure bent over the sky, and then her entire
Yeah.
body is full of stars, correct?
Yeah.
So this is, I can share this here. This is the image that traditionally I am familiar with as Nut.
Yeah. But it's older. Again,
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. So it's the same as Teth. Okay. So we find the wheel cross all over the world. I remember I was invited down not long after doing the patents to do a lecture in Tenerife. And there I met Don Alejandro and his entourage, who he passed away sadly now, but he was the chief Mayan elder and responsible for 6 million Mayan people. And he was allowed to do sun ceremonies on the pyramids in Mexico. And when he did, often all the Indian chiefs from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska joined him. He spoke at the Kinet, he spoke at the Sorbonne, he spoke at the United Nations, mostly complaining about the way we were destroying the planet. And anyway, I met him. And he did a sun ceremony on the top of Tenerife on the volcano. And I went there, and in those days I was a businessman and in a suit, so I felt a little foolish. And he said, "Take your shoes off," he says, "so you can feel Mother Earth." Well, I did. But what he did is he lit a fire. He dug a pit in the sand, and then he laid a Celtic cross in the middle. And he put a lot of scented stuff on top and pine cones and burnt this, and they all danced around it. And it was quite an experience for me because I was a stiff, conservative, conservative, I guess, entrepreneur, because I was an entrepreneur. So it was not what I was used to, but I did find it interesting. Anyway, what I did is I had an strange experience, because I had to go and demonstrate the working cross to the Mayans and to a lot of people at this conference in Tenerife, which was televised in Tidy TV and what have you. And so I thought, how can I do this? So I went and got this. I got 2 pieces of balustrade with sort of spirals round, and cut them in half so you could fold it up and put it in a fishing bag so you could fly it on the airplane. And I said to my daughter, I need to tie the top. And she said, oh, here's some rope off my yacht. So I had a multicolored rope, and I tied the top with that. And I thought, well, how can I spin it in the middle? So in spinning it in the middle, I put a drawer, a gold drawer knob on the middle of it. Okay. And then on the crossbar, I measured it out in what we would call an exponential scale. In other words, when you turn a circular scale into a flat one, and it becomes divided in like this. Otherwise, the plumb line won't work along it. I've got one to show you. Anyway, so I got in this and I went away down there, and I stood up on the stage when it was my turn, and I walked on, and I opened up this this staff that I'd made, and the Mayan people all gasped, and they went, "Oh, that's the glyph of the man with a purpose." Well, of course, I was knocked sideways with that. So I opened it up and I showed them how it was used. That is our lost magic staff with which we built the pyramids. Oh, well, that was quite a take, wasn't it? Now, I do have a bit of Scottish Highland ex-Knight Templar family lineage. So I was forced to apologize to him for giving away the secrets to the conquistador, because they'd been trading with them for nearly 300 years, because they knew how to navigate and find distance. So that was my story, and he promised to use it in the Mayan mystery schools to teach the young. Well, that's back in 1997, before the book came out.
That's amazing. So, do you still keep in touch with any of that community at all?
They've all gone. I do remember they did a ceremony on the top of the volcano, which was quite interesting, and they were some of the members, American members, descendants of the nations were there.
Yeah.
And they were very upset because of genetic engineering of foodstuffs.
Right. Yeah. Especially of corn. I'm certain.
Yeah, and they were saying, well, the biggest problem is that if it's controlled by a center and something goes wrong and genetically it can't reproduce itself, okay, then people all over the world will starve, because they're not if they don't buy it from the center, they can't grow their crops. Now that's back in 1997. So take your pick, Anyway,
Yeah.
I make no political comment. So what happened with the cross, I think, is it became a sacred instrument in temples. And because it became a sacred instrument in temples, what happened is people had to find their way around it. So I think one of the interesting ones is the astrolabe, okay, which is from Hipparchus. And if you see, it's a real cross.
Yeah.
Aged slightly differently, except that they point the arrows. Okay. And it's got holes in it as well, because if you're at sea, it reduces the wind resistance, which is quite interesting. And then after that, which I think was originally seen in Australia, is the quadrant, meaning quarter of a circle. And it's got 2 pinholes here and here, and a plumb line, which gives you the degrees. Now, it means a quarter of a circle. And if I remember rightly, and I'm just looking at my notes, I can't pronounce it. It's Turiim, India, used it to measure the solstices. Not the solstices, the, oh dear, an ecliptic plane. Anyway, eclipses. 1500 to 1200 BC.
Okay, wow. So that's much, much older than,
Much older than people realize. And of
yeah,
course, what it's got, I don't know if you can see it very well, it's got tiny pinholes.
yeah,
So the pinholes allow you to catch a star. This is a two-man job, you know, somebody
it
sights
is,
it,
yeah.
somebody reads it. And that's true with all of these things. The other thing that I did, because most of our history is built on, believe it or not, astrology, which means logic of the stars or mathematics of the stars, dutifully changed to become astronomy, which means naming of the stars,
Yes.
not logic of the stars. And that, I think, is because the British Empire was being built and the French and the British were arguing with each other. So if you look at some of the old charts, you'll see that they used real astronomy, or what you would call sidereal astrology, like the Indian people use, and changed it to tropical. So
Yeah.
tropical astrology is 30 degrees out and 2000 years out of date.
Exactly, because we move about 1 degree every 70 years or so.
72.
72
72
years.
years. Yeah. Now I'm 75 this year, so I've outlived my 72, 7 years.
Yeah, exactly. You're more than a degree.
Yeah, I'm doing all right here. Yeah, so the average lifespan of a human being is, barring accidents and illness, it was and is 1 degree of the precession of the equinoxes,
Hmm.
which is why the pole star disappeared and why the star signs changed. So I made these wheels, okay, I don't know, you can see them very well, and that's
Yep.
dated in 2002. So it's accurate to 2002. And it's very easy then, because if you see, it's broken down into the days of the month and the
Yeah.
month and the star sign and what position it's in. So you're able to see. Now, I was born on, for those astrologers still using tropical astrology, I was born on the 25th of August,
1949, right?
1949. And they think that I'm a Virgo. Well, of course not, I'm a Leo.
Yes.
I don't even sound like a Virgo, do I?
No,
It,
no, definitely not.
no.
And in fact, I'll pull up a star chart here that I use so that folks can take a look at this. The birth time will be not so important for this. All we need to do is take a look at the day.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And the point about it really, I guess, is it's said by science to be pseudoscience for that reason. Okay, so they're not looking at the stars. But let me give you an example of how astronomy is used in modern navigation. If you get an almanac that you need to use to navigate in a boat, it uses real astronomy, real star signs, real positions.
Correct.
And so I find it very interesting because I did the experiment on those of you that are interested in the Knights Templar. You'll see the Templar seal. And I don't know if you can find that. Can you, the Templar seal?
Yeah, that's the one
It's,
with the two twins basically riding
yes,
a horse.
yes, absolutely. So the Templar seal is really quite interesting, because it's a statement of their knowledge. And I don't know if I can you
Here we
find
go.
it?
Here
Or
we
do
go.
you
I
want?
found a stained glass window of it. Let me go ahead and share my screen here,
Okay.
and we can take a look at a couple of these. Yeah. So this is,
Yeah, that's not good. No, that's not the original one. I don't know if I can find it for you.
this one looks like the most original.
Keep going. Keep going. So it's the original seal has a temple on one side and the twins on the other. But actually, it's the twins that's the most important part that I'm going to say to you. So
Yeah, because this is going to signify anytime we see twins, this kind of tends to signify Gemini, correct?
It is absolutely correct. It's Gemini, but it's not that. That's a good one. The militum signal. Yeah, yeah, we passed on, but it doesn't matter. The one third on the left-hand side, third down, is closest to it. Okay, so that's Gemini, which is Castor and Pollux, the two stars, and even the spears are pointing in that direction, as they would when you look at it. The point about that is this. If you look out on Christmas Day or the winter solstice in modern times, what you'll see in the sky hanging there at midnight is Orion. But when the seal was created, it was Gemini. So this is a statement of their skill.
Dates it. It dates it. It tells us what the window is going to be when that would have been seen and made.
Precisely. And that's why when I wrote in my book about the Dixon relics, so we were talking about the Dixon relics, which was discovered in 1872 by Wayman Dixon in the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, and he found some, he pushed through what they thought was an air shaft and poked some sticks up, and some things fell out of it. One was a ball, a diorite ball, which the archaeologist called it. I made an exact weighted model of it, okay, of the same size and weight. So that came out, and the archaeologists call it a pounding stone, as though you could make sharp corners on something with a pounding stone. Utterly ridiculous. But what also fell out was a cedar measuring rod. And they've only just discovered it again. It's being dated in Aberdeen University prior to the building of the Great Pyramid. I think it's dated, this is off the top of my head, around 2300 BC. No, 3300 BC, sorry. And so it's much older than the pyramids, but it's found in the pyramids. And they think that it's rough sawn, but actually, do you remember I told you about the exponential scale? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what it has on it. And if you look at it, if you find the Dixon relics, and you'll see the wooden rod, which is Lebanese cedar, which shows that their mighty kingdoms that went out. You'll see the serrations, which show a scale. I think for your audience, I ought to explain what I mean by that. If you want to narrow this down, because it's not very accurate, this is accurate to 1 degree on the measurements here, then what you do is you put a ruler like this and then draw from the center, and then you've got a much more accurate scale. So the Dixon relics, when I made them and patented them to prove it, is accurate to 3 arc minutes, which is 3 miles on the Earth's surface and within view of the horizon. Now, this is not very good for flat earthers, so I'm sorry about that. But
that's all right. I mean, this is really, really important for people to understand, because essentially what we're showing is just by the building of the pyramid itself actually gives all of the data that is necessary to understand that the world must be round, and
yes,
it actually gives us the keys that would be necessary to help to understand both latitude and longitude. Correct?
yes, and that's right. And the methodology for finding longitude. But what's really important about the pyramid was this bit. Okay, now remember, it was the Bronze Age. So you're looking at the stars and you want to capture the moon. Okay, so you can you see that clearly?
Yes, yeah, quite.
That's a copy of the part of the instrument that fell out in the Dixon relics. It went in a cigar box to Piazzi Smythe in Scotland, who was the astronomer royal in Scotland, who kind of got berated for his Christian views on the knowledge that was in the pyramid at the time. Bless him. And then he ended up leaving Scotland and dying and being buried near Ripon. And if you actually go and look at his grave, and you'll see it's a perfect replica of a pyramid with a cross on top. So he knew what I'm telling you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and I've got something else I'll show you shortly. So the thing about it is it's a sign of Aries.
Yeah. Yeah. Very clearly, you could see that that is the sigil
Yeah.
of Aries through and through.
So I'm
Which
not
puts
going to
us in
argue.
the that
Yeah,
puts us in the time where we would have been during the precession of the equinox, like you said, during the age of Aries. It would have been in Aries
during the
now
age of Aries.
instead
Yeah,
of Taurus. For those who are listening, when we see the ox earlier in the Hebrew, that would have been during the age of Taurus. Now we're
yes.
starting to see the age of Aries
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
And I think I write a bit about that in my book, because that was really where Moses very upset with them for making a golden calf, because they weren't living in the moment. They were living in the past, trying to recapture a lost time instead of
Yeah.
living for now and looking forward, which is a great philosophical statement. So the pyramids were built in the age of Aries, at the beginning of it, just in the cusp between the transition between Taurus and Aries. And that's the statement. But it also, like all of these things, they were so intelligent. I mean, we use people's patents. We use them. We don't, very few of us actually invent things. So, but this is multi-leveled. So it catches the moon in the arch here, but then it catches a star in the V. And so what happens is you move the moon, the side of the moon, and then move it to, say, Venus. You can now measure the angle of the degrees. So it's on a staff, it's
Yes.
got a crossbar, that's got an exponential scale on it, and it's got a plumb line hanging from here, okay, or from the base of it. So it's absolutely spot on. And now you can measure the angles of degrees, and it's accurate to 3 miles or 3 arc minutes. And funnily enough, the Great Pyramid is 3 arc minutes offline.
Yeah, exactly. From the point where it,
Yeah.
ideally should be.
Now I'm going to lose people that believe in coincidence here, but never mind. So then you get to the pyramid, and I published this not long ago, and I think you might have read it on my academic page, is that the angle, the precision of the angle of the pyramid at 51.8 degrees. And this does not work if you're using the French metric system. This only works if you're using the anthropic system of feet and inches. So they've now, after all of this time, come to the conclusion that the original height of the pyramid before either it was knocked off, is 481 feet. If you multiply 51.8 degrees by 481 feet, you come to a circumference of the Earth as an oblate spheroid within 14 miles of NASA's measurement of the in miles, in ordinary statute miles, not nautical miles.
Right.
And that's a really good reason for hanging on to the anthropic measure, because if you become detached, you become detached from your ancestors and you become detached from nature. A good example at the moment is I'm desperately making sure that my grandchildren stay learning the analog clock, because the analog clock for everybody is a model of the Earth. That's the North Pole, and you've got the sun hand. Now it's only 12 hours now. It used to be 24. So the clockwork was precisely done to measure the position of the sun as the Earth rotated. They take it for granted, but they're teaching children now to only use digital watches. So they become detached further again, detached from nature, detached from their roots. I'm not saying it's deliberate, it's not conspiracy stuff, it's just using whatever is invented at the time and then making sure that the next generation uses it, but it's a step away.
Well, it is a step away. And it, like you said, every time that we create something new, I think that humanity really has the obligation not only to teach the new thing, because obviously if it's created and useful, people are going to want to use what's new, but to also understand the roots of where it came from and what those technologies were, because when we look back, we need to understand that otherwise we just end up losing a huge portion of our humanity. Where we come from oftentimes tells us where we're going, and unless we have context, we don't really understand too much about the next steps.
Well,
So
that's what happened when I told you I started out on this project, finding out how they could navigate to ship copper, tin, amber from the Baltic down to Egypt, and faience beads. And in England, they've found a place called Musk Farm. And 1000 BC, they're finding glass beads made in Iran.
yeah.
Oh, so there was a great trading thing. It wasn't nationalistic like it is now in Europe. It's all split into different countries and it become nationalistic. Even in the Middle Ages, it wasn't nationalistic under the Holy Roman Empire, which became Rome when it transferred itself. It was wide open. Freemasons were called Freemasons because they were free to travel without paying taxes or problems moving from one kingdom to another to build the great cathedrals which contain all this knowledge. Now, I don't know why way back in the Middle Ages that they put these icons in, whether it was the fear of judgment that if they kept the secret from the ordinary people, they could then stand in front of St. Peter's Gate and say, well, I showed it to them, but they didn't understand. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
So all these icons that are in the churches are really important. So you've got dragons, which is the northern hemisphere.
Draconis.
Yeah, Draconis. And Draconis holds the North Pole of the sun. And it never varies. Well, tiny bit, but
Yeah.
all over forever. The North Pole of the sun is in the same place behind the first coil of the serpent of Draconis. And you can then measure that to your celestial pole, and you'll know how much the tilt of the Earth is. It's simple, really.
Well, and this is really important too, because, this goes back to the Egyptian thing. Every morning at the rising of the sun would actually cast out of the sky what they would have referred to as Apep,
Yeah.
which is a great serpent that is constantly after the sun. The sun, Ra ends up defeating it.
How often do you see it on the heads of the Egyptian gods? You've got a sun sitting there on their heads with a serpent wrapped around it.
Yeah.
And it also goes forward. So it goes forward into the Middle Ages, I guess, when they were rebelling against the church. So they started doing the alchemy signs of the serpent eating its own tail.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the sign. But then the Pharaoh is saying, when he's got an array sticking out of his head, he's got two things. Say, he's got a vulture that reminds you that you're mortal. And he's got the knowledge of the serpent. It's astrological. It's the power of it. I look at it properly, and you've got this, and then you've got this beard that looks like a serpent's tail. Serpent knowledge. And that's all about astrology and being able to measure the earth and keep time and organize the first civilization. And that's what brings me to the fear of collapse, which is people don't like to talk about. You build a civilization, but you forget your roots. So the Bronze Age lasted 2,200 years, in which they made these amazing developments. Sailing boats, trading, kingdoms, network, and so forth. And then suddenly you've got climate change, you've got famine, you've got earthquakes, okay? And then you got migration. Does it sound familiar? And then you had war. And what happened was the elite fled. They scattered. Now, so what you might say? Well, they went into a dark age for 800 years. And the reason is only the elite and their scribes could read and write. The ordinary people couldn't. So they were left to flounder. And it wasn't until the Alexandrians came along with Alexander the Great. Now, interestingly, the Phoenicians survived. The Minoans didn't, but the Phoenicians survived. And they went everywhere. And I think if you look closely, you'll find they went to nearly every continent in the world.
Well, yeah, I mean that was kind of the height of the ancient world in a lot of ways. It was said that Phoenicians didn't really have an army, that they built everything around the concept of trade
Yep.
and of seafaring navigation. They were, even within traditional conventional history, we take a look at the Phoenicians and say, wow, they were amazing ancient seafarers.
Yeah.
How would they have done that, in your
Well, that's
opinion?
the point, isn't it? So
Yeah.
the thing about doing it is two things you need. One, you need what they call ephemerides or an ephemeris, which
Yes.
we would call an almanac. But actually, ephemeris was made on what's the positions of the stars, sun, and moon at midnight. That's the very important bit. And this is where oh dear, not Robert Bavell, Graham Hancock comes slightly adrift
Right.
because he is using the spring equinox for dating the Sphinx.
Yeah, not the best,
Right.
not the best one to
Now,
use.
the point about the spring equinox, it was for the ordinary people. So if no navigator in his right mind will take a measure of the sun or the star on the horizon because you have refraction. So you can see the sun when it's not even over the horizon in reality. It's refracted.
Yes.
And so they used the winter solstice. Now, if you want to look at the winter solstice, and I've got it on mine somewhere, I can show you it. You've got Draconis perfectly aligned on the winter solstice in 2800 BC with Alpha Draconis, the pole star, and on the other side, Leo. So Leo was built at the same time because they left it in stone, like a book of stone, for you to see what date it was. That Sphinx is perfectly aligned with Leo on the south, looking directly south at midnight at the time of the building of the pyramids of Giza. So I'm very supportive of the archaeologists in this, but I'm using a different system. I'm dating it through archaeoastronomy, and I'm using software, okay, that's been designed to run it back 5,000 years so I can see what the positions of the stars were at the time on a specific day. But if you don't work equinoxes, and that was the point I was making about the Knights Templar in the Templar Seal. They're saying, look, I do it right. Look at what I know. The reason that they spat on the cross is they were made of wood. Now, remember I said to you, that you've heard about the Knights Templars getting into trouble for spitting on the cross.
I mean, allegedly, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Allegedly. Right. The point is, their wheel was made of wood. What it rotated on was made of wood. I would say, well, why did they use this when they could have used a quadrant? For the reason I told you earlier on, which is this Polaris, that you can navigate along the side of coastlines or distances off by measuring the angle, which this instrument in this format, which is a modern example, will only do. So you can measure this way, okay, and you can
Yes.
measure this way. But
Now,
you
for
can
those who are
also
watching,
measure, you put it along the lubber line of the boat, the center line of the boat, you can measure what the angle is off the shore or whatever you're coming to, an outcrop of land or whatever. To spin it, the best lubricant that you can use on wood is human saliva.
especially
Then,
one that, yeah, where you wouldn't have maybe disposable fat or grease or other things
well,
available.
grease would make it worse. You're right, but grease would make it worse. So yeah, human saliva, it works if you've got beautifully turned wood, the wheels, and it's spinning on that. So yeah, that's probably where the idea of spitting on the cross comes from. Makes sense.
Yeah, well,
When I was
that
in the,
makes the most sense out of
we
all
had
of
to
the
spit on
possible.
our boots when I was in the forces to get high polish on them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Do you suspect that yourself or somebody you know has been affected by mold and mycotoxins? Well, if so, Microbalance Health Products is an incredible resource that you might want to familiarize yourself with. With so many natural non-toxic products to address mold and mycotoxins, they are an amazing company. We've used several of their products ourselves in the past, and we've referred them to lots of people over the years as well. We love this company. We know you will too. Click the affiliate link in the description below and support your own health and home while also supporting this channel. Thanks so much. Let's get back to this episode.
So let's cover a couple of things here.
Sure.
Let's
I went on a bit, didn't I, as I do? Go on.
Oh, well, that's quite all right. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of things. So first of all, here is a chart of astrology with all of the constellations taking up the amount of space in the sky that they actually take up. So this is going to be a little bit different for our viewers from what you would see with the 12 equal constellations. Of course, when we look up at the sky, that's not the way that things actually work. That's just a system of reckoning that became quite popular thousands of years ago. But you can still take a look at the fact that Crichton on 25th August of 1949. Now I had to go a little south of where you were born in Kilcreggan here. But
yeah, I was born in Glasgow, but that's okay.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Oh, well, then we have definitely a different location, but it's the same concept. The sun is not going to be that much different just by traveling, a couple dozen kilometers. So
I can tell you actually, it's half a degree.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So, but here you can see, here's the sun, and the sun would have been at 18 degrees, 22 minutes, 58 seconds Leo. So when we talked about his chart and the fact that, by tropical astrology's rendering, I think the 21st of August is kind of that cusp between Leo and Virgo. This is entirely different, and that's because of the precession of the equinoxes. And if we would look this up in, Vedic astrology, which is also a form of sidereal astrology, then he would also be very firmly in the constellation of Leo, not in the constellation of Virgo, the position of the sun. So when we mentioned that earlier, I just wanted to go ahead and show a screenshot of that.
Oh, thanks very much. That's a good one. I got a lot of planets, didn't I, around me on that day?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if I change the hour, I'm not sure what hour you were born, but I just set this to 12 o'clock.
2 o'clock in the morning, I think.
Oh, 2 o'clock. Okay, fair enough. In Glasgow, you say?
Yes.
Well, let's just take a look here. That will be so much easier. I was trying to find the nearest place to Rosneath that I could find that was actually programmed into my software here. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll just go ahead and change that chart, see how it all changes. So basically all the clusters are here. It's just where this is the horizon. This is where the rising sun would be. This is your horizon here, and this is the descending or descendant where the other end of the horizon is. So with that being said, the sun is not yet risen above the horizon. That's what we're taking a look at because it's 2 in the freaking morning. And we have a huge cluster of things between Virgo and Leo here. Pluto, the sun, Saturn, mid-sky, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Neptune, and also the south lunar node here. So yeah, really quite a cluster you have there, Crichton.
I did. But was a few other people in the world on this in the same cluster, wasn't there?
That's the thing. There always is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to show that because we were chatting about
really good. I've not done it that way. I just do it with a software astronomical program, so I can see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the thing that I really enjoy about this is that with the astronomical, this is true. So the only thing that changes, I'll share this again just so that people can kind of understand. The only thing that changes here between International Astronomical Union data of where a constellation ends and where a constellation begins is that for the purpose of astrology, as opposed to astronomy is just the naming of stars. So it's really easy for us to tell where they end and where they don't based on their right ascension and declination, which are basically like a GPS coordinate when we look into space, right? But essentially, for astrological purposes, we can't have this area where there's nothing. A planet might be between one constellation and another. What energy does that have? There's not really a system to help explain that. So what we've had to do with this system of astrology here is just take the end point of one constellation, the beginning of the next, and draw the mathematical midpoint between them, and that becomes the cusps. And so all of these constellations here are going to be the exact same size within just a couple of degrees, again, just because we have to draw that cusp. Otherwise, if, let's say that Uranus here would have actually been somewhere between Taurus and Gemini, how do we talk about that in astrology purposes? We wouldn't really be able to know what it means or what types of archetypes or other kennings there would be to that particular archetype. So instead, we just draw those midpoints, and that's where these cusps are. And it's kind of considered that anywhere within about 2 to 3 degrees is considered to be a blend of both of these. So for people who are taking a look at this and saying, wow, that's massively different than the tropical astrology I've ever seen, it's true for 2 reasons. One is that we take into account the precession of the equinoxes. And so, obviously things are not going to be in the same positions as tropical astrology was when Ptolemy came up with that whole system.
That's
the other
good.
thing.
Yeah, spot on. It's interesting though that you can start it more or less any time. If you look at the Semitic Phoenician alphabet, which we talked about earlier on, Aleph Beth, which means house of God, the A sign, okay, I'll do it that way. Have I got the way around? So the A sign shows the marker. So it's actually saying between the horns of the bull, if you had a pylon, a marker, a stick sticking out of the ground, that would be where they would measure it from. But if you were to take this one, okay, and say, well, where I want to start things from in the zodiac now, this is 2002, then, and I had to show this down at Woodhenge near Stonehenge at the summer solstice, because I say to people, what constellation is behind the sun? They don't know.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that it's the opposite of what you see south the night before. So that's how they measured it. So what you look south at midnight is where the opposite star sign of that is where the sun's going to be on the other side of the earth, and when it rises and when it's noon and so forth.
Precisely. And you can also tell exactly where the sun is at by taking the full moon, because the full moon means that the sun and the moon are at direct oppositions.
Yeah, that's the Egyptian 9 bows. So
yes.
So the new moon, the old moon, looks like a bow. And of course, if you were to put an imaginary arrow through, it's pointing at the position of the sun.
Correct.
So again, they used that and they wrote it and they said it's the 9 bows. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? But what was really interesting is that not only did they know what constellation it was in, they didn't know that there was one event in 2002 when I made this wheel, okay? One event that will not happen again for 25,920 years. And that is that Orion was holding the sun in its right hand.
Yep.
Okay? So you know then that if Orion's holding the sun in its right hand, the winter solstice is going to be when Orion's due south in the night sky. It's very simple.
It really is. It just takes looking at the stars.
Yeah.
And, realistically, we can calculate these things. It's all geometry. If we go back to the same geometry classes that we took when, I took them in my early years of high school. and you use proofs and you use theorems in order to, be able to, it's like theorems and postulates in order to be able to understand. And it uses logic. If this, then this.
That's
And
right.
then we can
Yeah.
calculate and triangulate the position of damn near anything in the sky. All of astronomy is geometry. And the exact same proportions that exist between those are also the same proportions that create differences in the musical scale. And this is kind of what
Absolutely.
Pythagoras was talking about. They are
Yeah, I
all
do
the
that
same
with the guitar
science.
sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I cheat
So,
though. I use a 12-string guitar, sounds more like an orchestra.
yeah, exactly. Well, there's nothing wrong with a more full-bodied sound.
Yeah.
But Craig, let's go back to something here. Let's go back to something because this is really one of the key points of your book. You spend quite a few chapters, if I remember. It's been a while since I've read this now. 8 months or something. But if I remember right, you spent quite a few chapters talking about the discoveries that we found in Khufu's pyramid in
Yes.
Egypt. You were talking about the relics that were found.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting time, of course, where they were using a metal rod inside of the shaft to try and get out any debris that
Yeah.
was preventing whatever they thought was up there. And what's interesting was that as they were doing that, there was a chamber that goes all the way down to a certain, it's like a shaft, right? They were able to find what's the name of the little Aries shaped.
Oh, the bronze
Yes.
hook, they called it, and Robert Bauval called it a Peshin Kef, which is
Okay.
used in the opening of the mouth ceremony when they're embalming. Okay, but of course I don't see it like that. I see it as the Aries sign during the time of the building, but also it's bronze for a reason. And I think I skipped over that. If you're standing out at night sky and you're looking at the stars, if you held something up that wasn't shiny and reflective, you wouldn't be able to see the stars properly. So if you have not a modern light, but a fire behind you, a burning fire or a burning torch, it's going to reflect off the bronze. Okay, so it's going to and highlight the bronze hook, so that the star can still be seen in this point, and the moon can certainly be seen.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
But it doesn't even matter if it's a new moon or an old moon or halfway through its phases, because it still fits. As long as you and your part, who's ever reading it with you, gets it set up at a specific distance. A bit like the bit we were talking about, the little finger at arm's length is a degree in width.
Right.
You hold it on the moon, you see it covers 2 moons. Fantastic.
So that was one of the relics that they found. They also found a piece of broken wood, essentially, that looked like
that's right. Yeah, that was the bit we were talking about, that's since been dated with carbon dating at Aberdeen University, because they found it by accident. It had been locked away in a box in the wrong part, and they only found it a few years ago. Robert Bauval had been trying, and I'm really grateful for the research of Robert Bauval and Mary Book for finding these bits that were scattered between 2 museums. And they carbon dated it to around 3,300 BC, which is nearly 1,000 years earlier, the wood, nearly 1,000 years earlier than the construction of the Gate Pyramid in which it was found, in the shaft in the Queen's Chamber. I wrote a bit in my book about this, saying that these instruments you mess about with these instruments on pain of death. That these were secret to the elite.
Yeah, well, just like we had in ancient Sumeria, there's multiple different types of priest classes. There's priest class scribes, there's priest class astronomers, there's priest class, sacerdotes, basically, who are able to guide the rituals for the public, make offerings. There's multiple different classes. And it seems like, based on the data that we have, that a lot of that same type of tradition carried on in Egypt as well. And so
Well, let's make the big leap, because we talked about the Bronze Age collapse and the disaster and the fleeing of the elite. It's the Crusades that recovered it and built Christendom. So they didn't just go to Jerusalem like people think. They went to Edessa. And they did have a failed crusade to Egypt where the king was captured, and it was the king that was captured. But what happened was they recovered it, and they recovered this knowledge to such a degree. And a prime example of this would be the Antikythera Mechanism.
Oh, yes, let's talk about that. Yeah.
You know, you look at the Antikythera Mechanism, what's the first thing you see?
Yeah,
How
exactly.
it works.
Now, for those who aren't familiar, who are watching this, let's just define that. The
Antikythera
Mechanism was basically a solar lunar calendar. Oftentimes it gets talked about as a computer because it's a working mechanistic model showing where the sun and where the moon are at any given time. And it was found in a shipwreck just outside of Antikythera off the coast of Greece. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And what's really important about the Antikythera Mechanism is they call it a computer, but it's actually far more advanced than that. It's when I was talking earlier on about almanacs. It's a nautical almanac. Now, that's automated. So you set it to the day, it tells you the position of all the stars, where the position of the moon is, where the sun is against the background of the constellations. So if you're navigating a ship, that is a fantastic thing to have on board, but it's automated. It is not what you observed with. The Antikythera Mechanism cannot observe the positions of the stars. It's a thing that's made because somebody measured the position of the stars. Now, you could argue it was done with an astrolabe, because that was 200 BC that was available. It may not have been the instrument I'm proposing, which I think is older anyway. But it had to be measured by somebody kneeling down. And that's a really important thing about the cross. You know, you can't measure the height of the moon or the height of the stars without kneeling in front of it, but you look up, you don't look down. Just saying. You have to look up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to the point of the Crusades because it's the Crusades that built Christendom, and that's what built everything we know. And if you think about it, the very first clock, 24-hour clock, is in Padua in Italy. And I don't know if you want to share that with everybody, but it's built up. Yeah. So it's the 21st 24-hour clock, Padua. It's spelled Padua.
Yeah. Pulling it up right now, or at least trying to. Here we go. Yeah, this is a beautiful one. Here we go.
Yes. So now you'll see at the center of it is a model of the Earth.
Correct.
Okay, and then to the left of you is the position of the sun, and telling you what zodiac star sign it's in.
Yes.
But the clever bit is the moon. You see, and that's showing you that it's I think it's an old moon, depends which way that's round. Is it the old and it's a new moon, isn't it? No, the old moon. Right. The point is, this had to be calibrated all the time. But what you have to realize is at Padua, Italy, which is beside Venice, at the time of the great Venusian ship trading. So they were able to give positions of longitude utilizing the moon from the 24-hour clock at Padua.
That's pretty fascinating. I'd never put that one together quite that way.
It's worth looking. If you want to look at this, the methodology is called lunar distancing, which you can find on Wikipedia. Lunar distancing. Okay. And that's how you find longitude. You need an instrument and you need an almanac. Really, an ephemeris, which shows the position of everything at midnight.
Right.
Okay. Did you have a wee look for that lunar distancing?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull that up right now. Here we go.
It's useful, isn't it, to be able to, I mean, I subscribe to Wikipedia. They do a great job. Some of the stuff's a bit odd, but they do a great job generally, because they give you the reference beyond the article they've written, which helps.
Yeah, oftentimes.
Okay.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah. Hide appeals for a week. Yes. They're
Yeah,
always,
well,
they're
what's
always
silly is
trying
they
to
should just
flavor.
track.
So
They should
that's
just
lunar
track. I mean,
distancing.
don't
Okay.
understand.
Lunar distance is the angular distance between the moon and another celestial body. So to try and explain it to people, if you have a prime meridian and you've made an almanac based on that prime meridian, then if the sailor is sailing away from the prime meridian or to the prime meridian, he only has to look up the midnight position of the moon against the background stars or against Venus or something like that. Okay. And the difference is between him and the prime meridian is how you find longitude. Why is that? The reason is that the moon goes backwards, it's retrograde. Okay, it goes back at half a degree. I think, let me just get this right for you. The problem is it goes back its diameter every hour. And that makes a difference and that's how it was done before we invented Harrison's H4. Can you see that? It probably explains it. So that the moon does not travel.
Yes, here we go. In 1 hour, it will move approximately half a degree,
yes,
roughly its own angular diameter with respect to the background stars and the sun.
So if you're looking at the ephemeris and it says that the position at the prime meridian, at the place where it was measured, is 2 degrees, the moon should be 2 degrees from Venus, and you measure it at 3 degrees from Venus, 1 degree is 60 nautical miles at the equator.
Now, obviously, that's going to change if you're not at an equatorial kind of longitude.
That's correct. So what happens is the nautical mile, or it's really an arc minute. The nautical mile is an arc minute. If you were to measure the Earth's 21,600 arc minutes round, or 21,600 nautical miles, not to be confused with standard miles, because it's just a direct thing for measuring for navigation. So if we're 1 degree off, we're 60 nautical miles off. So can you imagine how during the early time when they were trading in the 15th century and discovering America, that they put the astronomical chart on the charts, okay, and they put it 30 degrees off, just like tropical zodiac. That's where the problem comes from, because that would put them at 30 degrees times 60 miles off course.
Oh yeah, it's
no wonder the Knights Templar could catch the Spanish that were robbing the South Americans and bringing the gold back, because they also ran rum lines. So what looks like a straight line when you're going along a latitude line is longer than following the curve of the Earth. So they could wait to see the ship leave the dock loaded with gold and wait till it disappeared over the horizon, then set sail on a rum line, cut it off. End up in front of it. So that's what they did. They were clever. Anyway, that all came from the Crusades, that knowledge. And I don't know if you can see this, you'll love this if you want to see it. Remember, everybody thinks longitude was discovered with Harrison's chronometer, H4, in the 18th century. But Queen Elizabeth I, she knew how to do longitude with Francis Drake and build the British Empire by sea 200 years before Harrison. And the proof of it is a thing called the Caxton map. Okay, so it was Lord Burleigh was the one that did it for the Queen with a chap called Caxton, and they sold the chart, I think it's about 12 years ago now. They sold his chart, the Caxton map of England, for £1 million. And the newspaper headline, which was in the Sun or whatever, was, did they have GPS 200 years before longitude was discovered? Because it's a perfect map of England. And at the bottom of the map, it shows you the longitude. Okay. The method that they were using was lunar distancing and very accurate use of astronomy, which was
Right.
astrologia. Okay.
Yeah.
That'll upset the academics because I used the pseudoscience word of astrology.
Yeah, exactly. That's the minute that they tune out, whether the information is valid or not. They have the prejudice.
Oh, taboo words. Yeah, well, you
Yeah.
don't use that word. Oh, that's not academic. I don't want to know. Yeah, okay. Well, I can find my way around the earth without a watch. Can you?
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
I can get two sticks, put them together, hang a plumb line off it. I mean, it comes from the spindle whorl, and that's 40,000 years old. You know, when
The
this
drop spindles. Yeah.
weight, yeah, the spindle whorl. Yeah, well, that's how you find out if you want to do sort of the idea, where did it come from? Well, yeah, and were they perfect? Yeah, look at the threads they were making 40,000 years ago, and the clothes were exactly precise threads, and the amount of spins on them, so they knew how many turns were on it. Come on,
Yeah.
real. And then it always pointed to the center of the earth, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
You're bored, you sit in front of the fire, and you're one of those Venus figurines sitting in front of the fire, and I'm bored, right? Let's just see if my heart beats the same. Right, well, what length do I need? Oh, look at that, it's 40 inches. Actually, 39.4 or something centimeters, Oh,
Yeah.
1 beat per second. Well, wait a minute, I'm really bored now. Let's measure the width of the moon. How long does it take for it to go its full circumference? Tick tock. No, tell you what, that's too boring. What we'll do now is we'll do it for 1 minute, 60 beats, but we'll put some very fine sand through a sundial, and we'll see how long it takes. That's good. Right. Now, all we need is to weigh that. Right. Well, I've 60 times that, and now you've figured out how long a sundial should work for an hour. So simple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, these are relatively primitive technologies when you think about it.
They're the basis of our civilization. In terms of the spiritual side of things, and I did a little bit on time, the point was that they believed in reincarnation. Reincarnation was part of their culture. So you never died, your body did. And that's the fundamental thing of time, because what they thought was time is cyclical. Whereas we think, because we've been reading all our lives, that it's a linear thing, like, H.G. Wells, let's go back to the past. But you can't go back to the past, it doesn't exist. And it took 2,000 years for science to come up with the solution. And the solution to the past not existing was the first law of thermodynamics. No energy or material is lost, it's only changed. So it's taken us thousands of years to work out what they already knew. You can't put your hand back and change a thing. Not even the words that are coming out of my mouth now. Thank goodness for recording and photographs, or it'd be lost forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about seafaring. Let's talk about prime meridians here for a moment, because what we currently conceive of during the height of the British Empire, where prime meridian became centered essentially in Greenwich.
Yes. Well, it wasn't. You see, when I told you about Caxton map for Elizabeth, it wasn't Greenwich. It was Wells Cathedral, the 24-hour clock. That's their prime meridian, and that shows on the Caxton chart. Now, the point about it is we think about prime meridians. Everybody's got their own meridian. Wherever you're standing is a meridian.
Correct.
And it's just a great circle of the earth. And it passes through any observer. And this was the key that I came to in terms of thinking about the Great Pyramids, was that it's a great temple. And for you people listening, the word temple, I always say you can get everything out of a good dictionary. The word temple is Latin. It's based on tempo, which means time.
Time, yeah.
Okay, so, and here's an interesting thing for you. Church, the word church comes from kirk. Kirk is an old German word. It's used still throughout Europe, including Scotland, where I come from, and it means ruler or measurer. It does not mean congregation, but it is also a dual word, and it comes from kirkos, and kirkos is circle in Greek. So you've got measurer of circles or keeper of time, same as temple, just another way of expressing it. Well, before they invented this 24-hour clock that we were talking about earlier on, then what they had to do was measure the stars at night and the sun during the day. And they had to use the zodiac, which is why the 24-hour clock is built on a zodiac. It's really quite common sense, isn't it? So we have a lot of fun with that. The point is, during the Bronze Age, which we talked about, they couldn't work a prime meridian like we have now because they didn't have an instrument. And they could only measure within 3 nautical miles, and it's a wobbly deck and so forth. And one of the beauties of the instrument is that it's quite good on a wobbly deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So
it's well lubricated.
Yeah.
Well
a plumb line, you couldn't do it with a plumb line. It bounces about the plumb line. I think, and I look at the Bronze Age trade routes, there were stop-off places. So if you were leaving Egypt or you were leaving Cyprus, then you have the next stop off might be Malta and the Balearics or Sicily, and then through the great gates of Hercules at Gibraltar. And of course, the Phoenicians had their outside the gates of Gibraltar as well. I don't know if you know this, they protected it, they barriered it. They wouldn't allow anybody out into the Atlantic, out of the Mediterranean. They controlled it. So this is way back, over 1200 BC, long before Christianity or any of the religions. Yeah, it's long before. Shows you, doesn't it, really?
Well, that's also really kind of interesting because in the histories, we hear that the civilization known as Atlantis would have existed just beyond the Straits of Gibraltar as well.
Okay, that's really important because when I told you I went to Tenerife, then we found balls in Tenerife at the pyramids of Guimar. Okay, the pyramids of Guimar on Tenerife are duplicates of the pyramids on the right out in the middle of the Atlantic, the Azores.
Oh yeah.
Look it up. You'll see the pyramids on the Azores are the same as the pyramids in Guimar in Tenerife.
Wow.
Okay, that's really important because what it's saying to you is that the culture in the pyramids at Tenerife is the same as the culture in the Azores. Now, 900 miles off land, I think, 1,400 kilometers. These guys, they couldn't sail out of the sight of land. Really?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know that I'm buying that.
Yeah.
All right, this should share here momentarily. This is one of the basalt pyramids that is in the Azores.
Yeah. Now you look at the pyramids in Guimar.
And how do I spell that?
Guimar.
Gui.
And you'll love it because it's Thor Heyerdahl's museum on Tenerife. Yeah,
there we go.
There you go.
This is, that is really outstanding. We're seeing essentially the same types of structures here.
Yeah, but they don't want it to be argued really too much because it causes political problems about who owns what. The beauty about Portugal is it was a small country. It was also where some of the Knights Templar fled to. And they managed to get Brazil because they knew how to work great circles. So they said to the Spanish, this is how I understand it, they said to the Spanish, well, you can have everything to the west of this We were talking about it earlier on, this prime meridian. But the Spanish, because they couldn't understand the kind of navigation, didn't count that Brazil came to the east side of that prime meridian. So it ended up in Portugal without a war.
That's really interesting, because if I remember right, there was a while ago, I'm actually trying to find it, where they found, and just off the coast of the Azores, a large, very large underwater pyramid built this exact same way.
Yeah.
I want to say this was about
the Atlantis theory. I mean, everybody laughs about Plato. Plato was no fool, and you've got to think about these people were dealing with. Yeah, look how far offshore it is. You know, the Azores is so far offshore, outside the gates of Hercules. Yes, straight ahead. Plato.
This right here between Spain and Africa, this is where the pillars of Hercules were said to be. And they, you know, here's where the Azores are, deep into the Atlantic. Now, here's what's really interesting to me is that, yep, here we go. Now, this in Portuguese says a pyramid with 8,000 square meters, a base of 8,000 square meters, was found between Terceira and St. Michael's, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see their reconstructed model that they have here based on sonograms.
Yeah, but it politically doesn't work, does it?
No. Well, things like this disrupt the entire, historical narrative.
Yeah, well, my whole gift. Oh, that's a different thing. I mean, that's that's back to standardization of wheels. Okay, so back in the ancient days, when you saw those wheel tracks, that's how they standardized the width of a cartwheel.
Right. And I remember when they built the Roman road system, that was like largely that we still have the anthropic system largely because of that.
Sure. But the reason for it was, if you've got mud roads and wheels are all different sizes, what a mess. Okay, so they actually standardized them way back there, the wheels. But here's the interesting thing. We talked about it earlier on, didn't we? And that was pi. You know, they knew how far you could go with a wheel.
Yeah.
But we do it today. People drive their cars. How do they think they know? Unless you're using GPS, your car wheel rotates and it uses pi. So, and it, odometer, I think you call it, don't they? Anyway, sorry. So the point about it is, I picked up things and I've put it in the book, and I've had stuff since as well from the United States of America, particularly the Ohio mounts. And there's a perfect cross there on an armadillo shell, and also it looks like a swastika, and it's got the 36 markings all around the outside, and it's being held with a V shape. And it's held in, I mean,
we're seeing the same technologies all across the world.
The whole world. They try to say, well, people thought up the same thing about building pyramids at the same time. Don't be silly. It's because people fled, they left. People with technology leave when civilizations collapse, and they start again, but they keep the technology and they pass it to generations. I call it books of stone, if that's of any good, because, we were talking earlier on about the first law of thermodynamics, and the first law of thermodynamics is that things change. But if what we are doing now, will this be around in 1,000 years for people to listen to? But you carve it on the side of a solid granite block, and it might be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we take a look at the oldest Neolithic monuments still today, and we can take a look at, and there's so much understanding. We're only realizing now that, for instance, in Ireland and in Scotland, when we're taking a look at the multitudinous Neolithic monuments that are there, and in Korea, the same thing, that we're seeing that there are astronomical motifs that help us to understand what they were looking at, what they were trying to pass on, what that monument was built to commemorate, or when it was built possibly as a commemoration, and what types of messages are really important. Now, future generations, of course, they talk about these things anthropologically and archaeologically as their burial sites. I think that that's we have to get the same thing with the Great Pyramids. We have to get out of this whole.
Oh, yeah, and you've got to take. Look, I'll tell you something personal. All right, my mother and father passed away. It happens to everybody I know. But I put a Celtic cross on their gravestone, and it says "Forever Spring" on it, because spring follows winter.
Yeah,
And we can't get away from this cyclical sense of being, because this is a model of the zodiac. That's all it is. It's a model of the zodiac and the numbers that came from the zodiac. It's interesting, isn't it? In the old Hebrew, the word was with God. Well, God's in heaven. So we got the word from God. Well, yeah, as it happens, because it was, it's in the stars.
yeah, exactly. It's literally written in the stars.
Do you know what? And I've got to tell you, I was brought up a Quaker. Okay, so and I don't adhere to religion in the sense of the word, which is Latin, which means to be tied again. And I like to think of myself as a little bit sovereign and not beholden to anybody. But in that they believed in retying the born again child. That's the meaning behind religion. Now, of course, I upset people because I say whatever ideal you've signed up to is a religion.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
An atheist religious in the true sense of the meaning of the word.
Absolutely, yeah.
If
you have anything other than extremely malleable ideas, the second they become concrete to any degree, that becomes a belief system, which is
we had a saying for that in marketing years ago. It was died at 20, buried at 60.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
Because you shut your mind down. I can understand it though, because if you want to fit into a social structure, you need to think like the social, because many hands make light work, as Confucius says. That if you're all clubbing together for it's the word family, isn't it? Familia, it means where you're all pulling together. It doesn't mean your brothers and sisters. It means those that are working with you to get an end, okay, as a team. So I can understand religion from that point of view.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Everything you want to know is is in a good dictionary.
Yeah, exactly. If we go back to the roots of why words were created and why we use those words, we begin to understand a lot more about the nature of language instead of just taking their colloquial meanings the way that we were raised or reared to understand them. We can really
that was what I think I said earlier on, alphabet soup.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yep. So let's finish up here. We've got about 15 more minutes. We've got some really interesting things here, because at one point, the prime meridian of the entire discovered world was actually Egypt, specifically this
Yes.
plateau of Giza. This is why we feel that the Great Pyramid, or Khufu's pyramid, was actually built, because it was not only a timekeeping instrument, correct?
Yeah.
But it was also a way of being able to calculate basically all of the navigational things that an entire civilization would need. That's your assertion?
It's dual, and this is the problem we have in current society. Okay, the balance between practical and spiritual was equal. Now, archaeologists will say to you, "Oh, they were doing ritual." Yeah, they were doing rituals, just like a cathedral or a church does ritual, and you get buried near it and so forth, or maybe, or a temple, but it was also practical. The church kept time. That's why it's called a church. A temple kept time. That's why it's called a temple. All right. But then time is the most important thing, because if there is no past and there is no future, it will give you an example of why the Minotaur existed in the labyrinth for the Minoans. Because what they're saying is a man was born in the age of Aries, or a man was born in the age of Taurus. So he was part bull, part man. That's how they said, well, when you were born, and we just did it with my thing, you know. Oh, you're a Leo. You're a Leo.
You're the Sphinx here, bud.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a half lion, half man. So it's actually the creative power of the sun in the moment. And that's the point, because everything is solar energy. I was talking to somebody ages ago, and he said, well, the sun's just a fire. You know, it's a nuclear furnace. I said, right. I'd said the sun's intelligent. And the logic, the logic of it was the sun creates energy through the leaves in the trees. It creates sugar. The leaves fall to the ground. That creates earth. That feeds everything. Then a cow comes along, or a bull, or a sheep, and it eats the grass. And so the solar energy is now in the sheep. And then you cook your sheep, and then you bless it, and you eat it. And you're telling me the sun's not intelligent? That means you're not.
There you have it. Yeah, it's like basically all of the life that we know, at least from our perspective here on Earth.
Yeah, solar energy.
Yeah.
Well, there is stuff now they're finding in the bottom of the ocean, which is really fascinating. It doesn't need sunlight. So, yeah, but essentially everything, every piece of consciousness on the Earth is really solar.
Yeah, or at least above a certain depth, I suppose.
Yeah, so they knew that. Even if it's second-hand generated stuff, you know, the stuff bubbling in the middle of the Earth wouldn't bubble if it wasn't for the sun. It's electromagnetic, is it not? So yeah, it's just like, yeah. So I can't remember why I told you that. Oh yes, the point is about the prime meridians. So everywhere's a meridian. So if you can imagine you're back there in a sailing ship, you know where all the windroses are. At different times of the year, the wind blows in a certain direction in the Mediterranean, so you can work all of that out and work your trips out. But you want to know where you are, so you're heading for an island. So you've left Cyprus with your load of copper. Does everybody know that Cyprus means copper? That's what the word means. And then, you know, you travel from there to, say, Sicily. Okay, well, I'm heading for Sicily. That's on such a thing. Well, let's just figure out what direction that should be on. Okay. When you get there, you still want to find your longitude, but you might want to update your ephemerides. So each of these places, like Malta, like the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean, all of those places were manned back then. And I love that, because that makes sense to me, because I'm a logistician. People know I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics. So logistics is what it's all about. How do you get from A to B, and how do you do it quickly, and how do you make sure you do it cheaply?
Yeah, exactly.
What we do now, isn't it? You know, it's no different. But that's what they did. And all I set out to do was to crack the method of finding latitude and longitude and keeping time. And people say to me, well, you can't find longitude unless you know what time it is. And I keep saying, yeah, well, the clock in the sky called the serpent, which ticks around at, 15 degrees an hour, is keeping time. And what do you think your wristwatch is? That's where it came from.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of people are kind of disconnected from that concept now for many centuries, because we've had wristwatches and we've had, timekeeping pieces.
Yeah, don't think about it, just use it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So thinking, where did this come from? And like, why is the model the way that it is? And why did the Sumerians come up with this concept of a second and divisions of 60s and so on and so forth? So,
well, I think my main prime motivation, my mission, is to keep the ancient knowledge alive. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is, when you study history, you'll find every civilization rises and falls. That's why there were interweaving circles around the old Celtic crosses. Everything rises, everything falls, every life and death, reincarnation, all of those things are part of the nature of time. And I think when I look at what happened at the end of the Bronze Age and the Bronze Age collapse and the loss of knowledge, okay, that there's always a risk. And why do I say that? I always look back to the Carrington event. And have you looked at the Carrington event?
Oh yeah, of course,
I'm
absolutely.
sure you have with what you do. And we're getting increasingly fragile.
Yes, we are.
And if you're used to using a digital watch and getting your information so that you don't know how to tell the time or find your way around anymore. I mean, a prime example is when I was navigating in my 40s, I'm now in my 70s, then they were just introducing GPS. And so we were still using the old system of the sextant, which means 60th of a circle.
Yeah.
So we were doing that. And we were using charts and we were using radio direction finders and things like that. Then came GPS. We didn't trust it. And there was a reason we didn't trust it. It had to do with the first Gulf War. In the first Gulf War, GPS was owned by the United States. They switched it off. So I'm driving down the road from Scotland to England on the motorway and suddenly find myself on the screen in the middle of the Lake Districts about 10 miles to the west. So we didn't trust it. And so we kept charts. Now, the point is now, the British Navy still does it the old traditional way. They always back it up. And
they should, yeah. I mean, that's the safe way
when
to
I
do
was
it.
sailing the Mediterranean, always backed it up and took pride in being able to take a trip of, say, 100 miles and come through the harbour gate spot on. I love doing that because that's good.
Yep.
And sailing as well. And
Yeah.
And I fear for the next generation that if we have a major solar flare or God help us, a major war, okay, that they will lose the knowledge because
Which
it's all online.
I think that is absolutely imminent unless people understand how to go back in history and understand a lot of these earliest technologies that gave way to civilization the way that we understand it. If we have lost any of those critical steps that lead us from those points to this point, society collapses. We
Yeah,
restart almost at ground zero again.
yeah, and I think I'm quite happy about the indigenous people. They'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But our knowledge, and maybe we made mistakes or not made mistakes and built things and so forth. I don't like the idea of clearing off to a desert-covered, airless planet because we're going to ruin the planet we've got. Why not fix the planet we've got? Learn,
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
that's my view. Hey, this is heaven. There are places on this planet that are absolutely beautiful, and there are beautiful people on this planet too. But you don't hear much about them because they're not in the news. But lovely people that do kindness for others and so forth. So my mission really is to try and get past the political and academic bit to say, I patented this. You can't argue it. And this is the case for 25 years now. I've put it in the public eye and I do not get challenged. And I wanted to be challenged.
When I first read this, I have to admit, Crichton, I was like, I found your book. Actually, I found your papers on academia.edu. I can't remember. I'm really big into archaeoastronomy and just astronomy and astrology, actually, in general. I love taking a look at these things and trying to understand what more ancient mindsets would have been expressing, especially as it pertains to theology and religious doctrine and other things. We call that whole thing astrotheology.
Yeah.
And so I think I first came across one of your papers on academia.edu, and there was a reference of, as I published my book, I looked up your book and, oh, okay, cool. And I got this. And my initial reaction was, A Celtic Cross being able to be used as a navigational instrument. That's a stretch. But the more that I started to get into it, and the more I started to take a look at it, because in the book, you actually break down how to find latitude, you
Yeah.
break down how to find longitude, you break down how to be able to do surveying, you break down everything from being able to find and calculate angles and calibration of everything, like you said, within an XYZ axis, within a spherical axis.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of blown away. The more that I got deeper and deeper into the book, I was just like, I don't know if I could refute this after actually taking a look at it, building the models and saying, this is probably what's there. And then some of the most compelling evidence was that we end up seeing that same thing as a relic that's stored up in this weird, totally strange chamber. How the hell they even get it up there in the Queen's chamber in that shaft?
Yeah.
And how else can we explain the ancient seafaring model that we see all the way around the world? You know, I don't know if you've ever heard this one. This one is still jury's out for me on this, but there is a group that is saying that basically ancient Indonesian, Micronesian people sailed around the planet and created a lot of the megalithic cultures that we know.
I think that's right. And if you've still got time, then look up the Polynesian matang. And you'll be freaky. Wait till you see it. It's a stick instrument. It's called the matang, Mattang.
Okay.
Polynesian with it. Otherwise, you'll get.
Hey, here we go. Here we go. It looks like a kind of a lattice type of thing with some crosses. Let's go ahead and show up what just a simple search is pulling up.
The one on the far right, the matang, page 1. Do you see it?
Right here, yeah.
Look at that, a Celtic cross, not a Celtic cross, a cross patty. Now here's, so you've got the
Vesica Pisces here.
Yeah, Vesica Pisces. But here's the interesting thing. In the southern hemisphere, there is no pole star. There is no South Pole star. But if you put it on the cross, the Southern Cross, right, and you use those angles there, you can identify the celestial South Pole.
Yeah, of course you would, because you'd be able to identify the celestial North Pole, which means that you know through geometry, which this is telling you exactly. I mean, this is 360 degrees, so it tells you exactly what is opposite at 90, 270, 0, and 180.
So if you start to think back to the 2000, remember how long our civilization's been going? Not very long, and that's certainly not our technology. They had 2,200 years. They spread to China and beyond. They knew how to navigate by the stars and the sun and the moon. And they also knew how to make one of our greatest inventions ever, a boat. And the point about a boat is, and I was doing something for somebody the other day saying, well, you know, how fast could the Romans spotted the British boats, which were made of skin, in 64 BC, I think it was, when Caesar tried to first invade Britain. And he said the boats were around 60 feet long, full of families, and flew over the water like seabirds. So when you work out water length against displacement, it gives you the potential speed of the boat. The potential speed of a 60-foot boat is around about 12 miles an hour, between 10 and 12 miles an hour, 24 hours a day.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a decent amount of distance that can be covered.
Yeah, you can cross from one side of the Mediterranean's 2,500 miles from end to end. And you can go from that to the other end in around 12 to 14 days.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's to put that in.
You can get your head around it, haven't you? It's harder to walk over land when there's no roads.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, what about the Badlands in the States? I mean, you will walk across that quicker than you can sail around. You can sail around. Yeah. Yeah, boats are fast things, and you're taking your food with you and your family and everything you need and change of clothes and everything in a house on the water that can do, let's say, average 7 miles an hour. And you go, well, that's not very fast, except you're doing it 24 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Because essentially all it takes is just somebody keeping navigation on point in order to determine where your rudder is going to be so that
Yeah,
you
you
can,
take it in turns. And that's
yeah,
what you did. It's called a watch system. And funnily enough, that's where that name comes from, watch.
yeah, keep watch. Yeah.
Yeah, watch.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
fun, isn't it? It's fun to uncover things that, we become very bored or boring in our staid ways of looking at our ancestors. I called the book The Golden Thread of Time because it's a thread that's wound throughout time, through history. It's managed to survive all the way. I should really call the book The Resurrection of the Cross, but it's, you know, it's
It's
wound,
definitely not soft
it's
fundamentals.
yeah, no, it's wound its way all the way to the present day, and I found it by accident.
Yeah. Yeah. It stumbled upon it, really stumbled upon it.
Yeah, but if it wasn't for my life path, I wouldn't have asked the question. And that's
Yeah.
the seek and
Did
you
you
shall
have,
find meaning. If you're seeking, you'll find. If you're not, you won't.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So very interesting stuff. Essentially, some of the biggest takeaways that I have from reading your book, which might be interesting for listeners to hear. One is that at least dating back to ancient Egypt and the building of Khufu's pyramid, we see an instrument that bears uncanny similarity to the Celtic cross as a measurement instrument. This instrument, oh,
Can
go
I?
ahead.
I'm interrupting you, but the Nuit and the Teth, right, are the Celtic cross in letter form. Okay. Whereas the instrument that built the pyramid is far more accurate, and it's like a Latin cross. So you've got I'm making a sign, but it's like a Latin cross, long staff, and
Yes.
a crossbar, and from the very apex you hang a plumb line, and then it divides along a Sumerian 5,000-year-old system. But you
Yeah,
can use
exactly.
you can use
Giving
metric.
the gradation.
Yes, the graduations that are along it. But it comes even further than that. It was King David that brought into Scotland. He brought in the what they call the L wand. So the L wand is what the Queen holds.
Oh,
It's
right. Yeah.
the scepter. Okay, the L wand, and he introduced it after the Crusades through the Knights Templar into Scotland, and it was 18 inches long from the elbow to the finger. 18
Yeah.
inches. Queen Elizabeth turned it to 36 inches, which is 360 degrees or 180 degrees. But he said the inch, okay, should be the width of a man's thumb, okay, at the base of the nail. So I got a ruler just to check, and maybe it's because I'm a Leo. Perfect.
Yeah. There you
Perfect
go.
inch. Yeah, forget this French stuff. Keep it. Just keep your anthropic measurements, because if you don't have them, you can't connect to the Sumerian measurements, you can't connect to time, and you can't read the ancient stone buildings which were built on anthropic measures. And that has to do with related to the zodiac and the speed of the sun and the moon. In the old pre-Christian Old Testament, Hebrew Testament, it tells you in Genesis 1:14, you keep time by the sun, the moon, and the signs.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's what
exactly.
it tells you. Okay. And there you go. And the mathematics you learned at school, this is really interesting. The mathematics you learned at school, which is the times table and 12 and 24 and 36 and 72 and all of that, that's actually what it says in it took 6 days to make the earth, and on the seventh God rested. Okay, this is really important, because what nobody looks at when they talk about how long it took is what it says. The morning and the evening were the first day. Doesn't say in a day. So the morning 6 hours long and the evening 6 hours long. And then the next one is 24, and the next one is 36, and the next one is 48, and the next one's 60. So we're in the Sumerian, and then we've got the number of the moon and the speed of the wobble of the earth, 72.
Wow. Yeah,
Now,
that puts things into a whole different
just
perspective.
a bit, doesn't it? Because you've got to read a little deeper. And the reason is it was 500 BC, and they were coming out of Babylon, and they wrote these things down, but they protected it.
Absolutely, they did.
So
I
it's
mean,
not for the dimwit, is it? It's not for the one that can't see. It's not the one with no imagination. It's the one that's got a brain. To look and see between it, you know, the morning and the evening. What do they mean by the morning and evening? Well, 6 hours in the morning and 6 hours in the evening. It's not 24 hours in the morning and an evening.
right?
You see?
Yeah, you really have to break it down the way
So
that it
here,
would fit.
you'll love this. Look down on the pyramid of Khufu. 8 faces. Yes?
Correct. Yeah.
180 degrees of face. 180 degrees of face. All right. How many minutes in a day? In a full day and night? 24 hours? Nobody thinks about it. It's 1,440. Multiply 8 into 180. 180 times 8. 1,440 even tells you how many minutes there are in a day.
Wow. Yeah, and I remember reading something like that as an assertion inside of your book as well. Was
Oh,
that
it's on my academic page. I published it. Yeah. And that's the point, you know. So there you are. You've got this timepiece, this temple, place of measuring time, telling you 5,000 years later what you already should know.
So if you had to summarize all of this knowledge that you have kind of put together, and we didn't even have time this time, we'll have to have you back on to talk about the Neolithic stone balls.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's something else. That's amazing.
That really is that.
It's so simple. It's
Oh, yeah.
model of the earth. Yeah, it's. I'll tell you what is really interesting, and it's in the Roman Catholic Church. It's St. Peter's symbols. And what he's got is cross keys. You can look it up, right? He's got the keys to heaven, he calls it. And the bottom of the keys are 2 Celtic crosses.
Yeah, that's the Pope's sigil, right?
Yeah, the keys to heaven. St. Peter's keys to heaven.
Here we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at this, see if I can find a good version that I mean, I've got the keys. Let me just see here. Let's see if we can share this really fast.
There you go. Coat of
Yeah.
arms. Yeah, look at it. 2 Celtic crosses with a key on the other end. And it's called the keys to heaven. Oh,
Yeah.
the mitre at the top of the ones above, that's for the sign of Pisces, because you're in the age of Pisces. Still are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we won't be moving to Aquarius for still another 100 or so years.
Yeah. Yeah, but it also says no man knows the hour of the day, and I'm not surprised. It's pretty tricky to measure it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? The keys to heaven. Well, heaven's the sky, and those are the keys for measuring it, and that's the power of the church, which means measurer, ruler.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. A ruler. Yep. A measurer.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, again, this just goes to show that all of the symbols are directly in front of us. Even if some of the people utilizing these symbols have forgotten what their essential esoteric meaning is,
yeah,
the symbols are right in front of us. And all we have to do is really begin to look at them critically and understand their functional uses in order to regain a huge portion of our ancestry, a huge portion of our humanity.
I think that's right. I mean, I studied a thing called precognitive bias. I'm sure you've studied that as well, and that's an issue because it's this closed mind thing, because that's the way you've been trained, and it's very difficult to break out of that and become sovereign in your thinking, isn't it? It depends,
Yep.
I suppose. Yeah, I mean, look what happens if you get into the academia now. Not you just get narrower and narrower down the field within which you are. I demonstrated this at Cambridge University twice, and it was filmed once. And I was doing the anthropic people, and they're brilliant, lovely people, but they were more interested in what's the word for it? What gibbons do after they eat.
Yeah, kind of regurgitation.
Oh God. Oh dear.
I mean, that is exactly kind of the nature of
Too narrow, you see. Yeah.
I
Yeah, they
learned
get
it from such and such, and I invested this amount of money to learn this information, ergo it must be true, as opposed to
Oh yeah, and follow your professor because and you can understand that. But our original scientists were polymaths.
yeah,
They were not
absolutely.
specialists. All right. And specialization puts people into a box, and you need to be a polymath. You don't need to know precisely everything about everything, but you need to have an overview. You need to be able to look down from heaven onto the earth, not from the mud up. That's why I always say you've got to look up when you kneel before the cross.
Yeah, otherwise you're not going to understand or ascertain its secret. Turn the
Yeah,
cross to the side and then look
yeah.
up.
Let's look up. And I mean, Columbus is shown kneeling before the cross, isn't he?
Yeah, in that same fashion, actually.
Yeah.
So
There you go. It's wonderful stuff, isn't it? It's fascinating undoing it. But I'm not sure why it's happening right now. I mean, a lot of people are finding things. I did tell you that they've found a ship. It's this whole the sea shall give up its dead bit, that you suddenly find that after all this time they've found a ship offshore, a mile deep off between Israel and Cyprus, I think it is, in the Mediterranean, which means that they navigated offshore and suddenly they're going, how did they do that?
yeah, exactly. Well, and a lot of skeptics would just say, well, that's probably why the ship crashed. That's maybe why it sunk because they got too far. You know, I
That
I
doesn't
think
work because they've checked it out. They've checked out the hull and everything, and it's got all its amphoras and things like that in it, and they know that it wasn't wrecked in that sense.
well, there you have it
And
then.
I always tell people, um, it's um, it's the land that sinks ships.
Yeah, exactly.
Very rarely the sea. I know we've had a terrible experience with a yacht in the Mediterranean, 60 huge thing that is 60 meters, isn't it? Um, but they're investigating, but they got dumped on by a massive water spout. There's not much holds up to one of those. What is it? 1 liter equals 1 kilogram. I'm being metric, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, which would be, I think 1 gallon is approximately 8 point something pounds. So, yeah,
Heavy,
very, very heavy. Yeah.
very heavy. Worse than a tornado on land. Much. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
But it
significantly.
can happen. But anyway, the ship was 57 miles offshore, and you can only see to the horizon at the height of 6 feet, 3 miles. So,
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up here because I think
yeah,
we've
lovely.
covered.
I really enjoyed this. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, me too. There's a tremendous
Great.
amount of information. If you really want to dive deep and understand more about what we're talking about here, The Golden Thread of Time is an absolutely fantastic book. It is not exactly the easiest read. Um,
No, it's
there's going
tricky.
to be a lot of technicality, especially for people who don't know anything about navigation, but it's broken down in such a way that you'll be able to understand it and ascertain it even if it only takes a little bit of extracurricular research to help put pieces of the puzzle together from whatever your starting point is now. Like when I first read about this, I knew nothing about nautical navigation in terms of practicality, and just hopping online and learning some things helped me put all of the pieces of the puzzle together really quite easily because most of it is spelled out here. You also have all of the articles under your name, Crichton E.M. Miller, on academia.edu. All of the links will be down below. And then you also have a DVD that you were telling me about called The Cross of
Yeah,
Thoth. Or
across a Thoth. That's it's on Amazon. Yeah. Oh, look, I've got a reflection there. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yep, there it is. And so we'll include a link to that as well. And your caveat with that, you said that the major critics say that the music is a little
Oh,
too
the
loud.
music's fantastic, but it's a little bit loud. I get that there's a few people complain, but it's a group called Soul Path, and they do Celtic music. It's absolutely fabulous. So yeah, if some of you might enjoy listening to the music rather than me. I am Celtic.
Fair enough. So all of these resources are available. We'll have all of the links down below. I strongly, strongly suggest taking a look at this information because it does take the entire narrative of ancient seafaring was not possible because we didn't know about longitude. And so people would have to stick really close to land. This takes everything from St. Brendan the Voyager going off to America long before we have the Viking colonies in Newfoundland. This, I mean, and ancient, it talks about basically how the Phoenicians would have been able to utilize this by taking a look at the Matang, which I didn't even know about that. This helps to talk about how Malaysian or Indonesian peoples would have been able to do vast distances of seafaring as well. And there's a good chance, basically, based on the genetic similarities between Australia and Africa that have recently surfaced, that we have very far ancient, 40,000 plus year ancient voyages that would have been able to go across oceans from the African continent to what we now can as Australia. So I think there is a lot of our history that needs to be rewritten, and whether this particular tool or variations of it were used, this is something that we need to open our minds to and begin to understand how it can be used and how we can keep passing on the basis of this technology for basically all of the types of navigation, construction, surveying, etc., even if and when electricity and modern technologies go kaput. So very
Have you got
important.
time to see one last thing?
Sure.
1936, between the wars, the Phillips Pocket Surveyor. You're going to love this. Made, I think, by a Freemason. All right, doesn't look like anything till you do that.
Oh, wow. Yep. Oh, there it is.
1936, a friend of mine found it in an antique shop.
Oh my God.
Right, and it's got little holes in the side for you,
Absolutely.
little sighting things. And what it was to do was to teach young men how to survey. So what they were doing, if you think about it, is what he was doing and getting out between the two wars. What people don't realize is the majority of people that knew this were either in noble families or Freemasonry, and they were slaughtered in the trenches. And their knowledge died with them. And so between the end of the First World War and the Second World War, this man produced this and this method of doing surveying, the pocket surveyor. And of course, it's a Celtic cross, isn't it?
It sure is. I mean, yeah, that's really fantastic. You would be able to do just about everything with that besides surveying. Like you'd be able to tell distance and arc and everything with
Yes,
just
but
a
it's not as accurate as that, obviously. So if you can see, it's only 4 divisions. It wasn't for that. It was to give a principle of surveying and also keep the history alive. So that passed away with him, okay? And I managed to get my hands on one 20 years after I'd invented this and patented it. So do you like that? Is that not just lovely? It's a tiny little thing.
Fantastic.
Isn't it just? Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, it's like an astrolabe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's cool because this one tool can actually replace a quadrant, a sextant, an astrolabe.
Well, you see, this is the point. This is what you can't do. You remember the one that I took out of the Great Pyramid, the Dixon Relics one? You can't do this with one of those. This is a Polaris. So you can measure angles to left and right, but you can also measure angles this way and that way.
Yeah, you have your
So there you
three-dimensional.
go, you see. So that was lovely after 20 years to find that I wasn't the first.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really fascinating, especially 20 years after you came up with this whole concept, started writing
Yeah.
about it, to actually find, wow, in 1936, somebody was utilizing the same type of tool as a little pocket tool for surveying. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So,
But I think the problem is the old blasphemy laws, which are now dead and gone.
yeah.
If you think about it, that restricted a lot of people saying, because it had become a sacred symbol.
Exactly. And for those, especially all of us Yanks that didn't know what those blasphemy laws even were, they existed from a very long time ago, 500 or 600 years ago,
Yeah.
basically saying that you can be imprisoned and punished even by death if you were to blaspheme.
Yeah. Well, Tyndall was a prime example. So Tyndall was strangled and burnt at the stake for translating the Hebrew Testament, the Old Testament, into English. And then King James I made the King James Bible based on the work of Tyndall.
Yeah, saying, it's okay if I do it. I'm the king. I'm God's vicar on earth.
Well, you remember I gave you the numbers, the numbers in how long it took for God to make the earth and how you should do astrology for keeping time, which is what a ruler did. That's what a ruler does. Um, and it's a blueprint for civilization. Well, that's only for kings, queens, and churches. It's not for
Right.
the ordinary person. But we're in a democracy now, so why don't we know that?
Well, not everybody's. We're democracy by name, not necessarily by structure, you know.
Yeah, but the symbols are in the churches. Okay, and that's the point. And if the churches fall down or they get turned into gambling parlors or restaurants or houses or things like that, the symbols will disappear. And
Yeah.
you have no link to your ancestors.
Yeah, which is the most important thing, especially with an impending polar flip coming up, and the weakening of the magnetic field.
Yeah.
Let's
Is it
not
one
rely
off South Africa? And yeah, you're so right. You need to know these things. I think I touched a bit on that, didn't I, in the book as well, which is the possibility of a polar slip.
Yeah, exactly. Which seems pretty imminent with the North Pole has been drifting pretty consistently. I think just since 1954, we're at about 38 degrees or 40 degrees now.
Well,
And
yeah, it's why we don't rely on compasses, because compasses have a thing called variation and so forth. You're much more accurate using the stars because there's generally not that much variation at all. So, but yeah, I mean, it's weakening. So I think they've got a new North Pole off the south coast of South Africa, is it? Or is it off South America? Somewhere in that area, there are magnetic anomalies. So there's a possibility of a magnetic pole reversal. So don't know how that will
right,
affect things.
yeah, from the data I've seen, it seems a little bit more than a possibility. It seems like we've got about 15 to 25 years
Wow.
before the magnetic pole is actually, or the magnetic field of the Earth is actually decreased enough
Yeah.
for a simple solar flare, just like, just a few days ago, we had an X 4.5
Yes, we did.
without
Yeah.
our magnetic or without our magnetic field. A simple solar flare would be able to inflict horrific damages to all of the electromagnetic infrastructure that we've built up as modern
That's
societies.
what concerns me. Yeah.
So it's like,
It's quite,
let's get to
it's
using
quite,
technologies like this.
yeah, it's a kind of interesting philosophy, because you see, during the Middle Ages and medieval times, when there were kings, queens, and church working like a bigger franchise than McDonald's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
church got tithes and the king got the taxes. And underneath that were the nobles, okay? And the nobles controlled the church, the crown, and the nobles controlled. The merchantmen below that, they were controlled in guilds.
Yeah.
And it would agree with the church and through the nobles and through the kings and queens that would be the price, and it would have to be equality. Well, we've removed all of them after the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and now the kings and queens are gone, the church is gone, it is, and the merchants are in charge. But the thing is, you and I know, because you're in business too, you know, the three important things in business: investment, profitability, and competition.
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem is that when you get into giant organizations, they take on a life and a mind of their own, and they're forced by competition. So if the competition is reducing the prices, right, by offshoring or whatever they're doing, that's an issue that never happened during the Middle Ages. That makes sense? You can cut the last bit if you like. Sorry. It's a change that's come about that wasn't there 200 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So once again, Golden Thread of Time, we'll have all of the links to all of the other resources down below. Crichton, we'll definitely have you back on. I really want to discuss those Neolithic stone balls. There's a lot of them. It's always back every time that we get the opportunity to chat together. So thank you so much for all of your time.
Every survivalist should have one.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, I agree. More than a child's plaything.
Yeah, so, it is indeed. It's fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on.
Always a pleasure, Crichton. You have an absolutely fantastic evening. We'll be in touch again soon.
Super. Take care.
You too. Ciao.
Ciao.
And thank you to all of you listeners who have listened to this and taken intrigue. If you liked this episode, please feel free to share it. If there's anything more that we can answer for you, please don't hesitate to put your comments in the discussion. Again, thank you so much for joining us for this Alchemi-Culture podcast. Have a great evening.